My classmate told the whole school. My friend faked a sewer slide for attention while passing out suicide hotline stickers with her on them. When I asked her why she was doing this, she smiled sweetly and said, "I'm just trying to help you be honest about who you are." I didn't say a word. That was 9 months ago. Last week, she flinched when someone mentioned my name. Renee Wilkins returned to our elite academy after 2 months at a psychiatric facility and walked straight into social execution. "There's the girl who faked a sewer slide attempt for attention," Amy announced to the entire cafeteria, making sure everyone heard the word faked. Within 24 hours, Renee went from student body president to untouchable. Her Harvard recommendation letters vanished from the counselor's office. Her AP teachers suddenly couldn't remember her name. Parents pulled their kids from her study groups like mental illness was contagious. I tried sitting with her at lunch once, but my best friend yanked me away. "Don't be stupid. She's toxic. Probably planning her next performance." I watched Renee for weeks after that, and what I saw didn't match the narrative everyone was selling. The girl they called an attention-seeking manipulator spent her free periods tutoring kids in the library, ghostwriting college essays for students whose parents didn't speak English, quietly paying for SAT prep when families couldn't afford it. She did it all anonymously while the same kids she helped called her psycho in the hallways. Meanwhile, Amy led a calculated campaign of destruction. Renee's student government position was revoked for health concerns. Her parking spot was given to Amy's cousin. Her locker plastered with sewer slide hotline numbers by the Mental Health Awareness Committee Amy specifically created. The school newspaper ran an op-ed about performative mental illness with thinly veiled references to Renee. But through it all, Renee never snapped, never retaliated, just kept her head down and helped people who hated her. Everything exploded during the senior class trip to the lake retreat. Trish, this quiet scholarship girl, started choking at dinner, her face going from red to purple in seconds. Anaphylactic shock from hidden peanuts in the pasta. She was clutching her throat, eyes bulging, while everyone screamed uselessly. The chaperones were doing shots at the staff cabin. The nurse had left early. Trish was dying right in front of us. That's when Renee moved like she'd been shot from a cannon, shoving through the panicking crowd. "Where's your EpiPen? Where is it?" She dumped Trish's bag, frantically searching. When Trish couldn't speak, Renee didn't waste time. She found it and slammed it into Trish's thigh, counting out loud. But Trish had already stopped breathing, completely limp. Renee tilted her head back, cleared her airway, and started mouth to mouth, counting compressions between breaths. The rest of us just stood there watching the campus pariah literally breathing life back into someone. After the longest minute of my life, Trish gasped and her chest started moving. Renee had saved her life, but by morning, Amy had already poisoned the narrative. "Isn't it convenient that Renee knew exactly what to do? Almost like she planned it," she told the returning chaperones, just like her fake sewer slide. Classic attention-seeking behavior. The principal banned Renee from the rest of the trip while parents demanded an investigation into whether she'd orchestrated the allergic reaction to play hero. The school nurse grilled her about how a teenager knew emergency medical procedures. The girl who'd just saved a life was sent home in disgrace while Amy convinced Trish to file a formal complaint. That's when things went nuclear. Someone got into the school's confidential database and leaked Renee's entire psychiatric file on the anonymous confession page. Therapy transcripts, medication lists, detailed notes about her attempt, everything. The comments were brutal. "Should have finished the job. Natural selection at work. Attention were exposed." Within hours, Harvard rescinded her early admission, citing character concerns raised by her community. Yale and Princeton followed. Her car tires were slashed in the student lot. Someone spray-painted "Die Better" along her car. I found Renee one morning on the science building roof, sitting with her legs dangling over the edge, 4 stories above concrete. When she saw me, she didn't move back. "You're the only one who ever looked past the story they wrote about me." Her voice was empty, like she'd already made a decision. "Want to hear something funny?" She laughed, but it sounded like breaking glass. "I never wanted attention. I wanted to disappear completely. That's what the attempt was about, but they turned even that into a performance." She pulled out her phone, showing me screenshots I couldn't process at first. Text messages from Amy's mother, dated 2 weeks before Renee's sewer slide attempt. "If you tell anyone what you saw, I'll destroy you and your father's career. You're just a stupid child who doesn't understand adult relationships." The truth hit me like a sledgehammer. Renee had walked in on her father having sex with Amy's mother in her own house. Amy knew the whole time. Every single act of cruelty was calculated to discredit Renee before she could expose an affair that would trigger divorces worth millions. "Amy's been protecting her inheritance by destroying me," Renee said, standing up, moving closer to the edge, making sure no one would believe me if I ever told the truth. "But maybe it's time everyone knew." She looked down at the drop. "Or maybe I should just give them what they've been pushing me toward anyway. No one believes anything I do is real, so why not make it real this time?" I watched her fingers grip the phone tighter, knuckles white against the screen showing those damning messages. The wind picked up, whipping her hair across her face as she took another step toward the edge. My heart hammered so hard I thought it might crack my ribs. Renee's hand trembled as she held the phone over the 4-story drop. She looked at me one more time, then back at the screen. Her thumb moved to the share button, hovering there for a moment that stretched like taffy. Then her grip loosened. The phone slipped from her fingers, tumbling end over end through the air. We both watched it fall in slow motion until it exploded against the concrete below, pieces scattering like shrapnel across the walkway. Her legs gave out and she collapsed backward onto the roof, sobbing into her hands. I rushed forward, grabbing her shoulders and pulling her further from the edge. She didn't resist, just crumpled against me, her whole body shaking with exhaustion and defeat. The roof access door burst open. Amy stepped through, not running, not panicked, but walking with measured calm like she'd rehearsed this moment. She positioned herself between us and the door, her face arranged in perfect concern. Amy pulled out her phone and typed quickly. I caught a glimpse of her screen as she angled it away. She was texting someone that Renee was safe. False alarm. My stomach dropped when I saw the contact name, Mr. Wilkins, Renee's own father. Renee saw it too. Her face went completely blank, like someone had pulled her soul out through her eyes. She pushed herself up from the ground, swaying slightly. Amy reached for her arm, gripping it with fingers that dug in just a little too hard. The door opened again, and Mr. Peterson, the evening janitor, shuffled through with his mop bucket. He stopped short, annoyance flashing across his weathered face. He muttered something about kids on the roof again, completely oblivious to what he'd walked into. Amy's mask never slipped. She explained that Renee wasn't feeling well, and they were just getting some air. He grumbled but didn't question it, too focused on starting his rounds. I watched Renee's face as she processed her options. She could scream the truth right now, tell Mr. Peterson everything, but what proof did she have? Her phone was in pieces 4 stories down. The screenshots were gone. It would be her word against Amy. Amy's, and we all knew how that story would end. Renee stayed silent. Amy's grip on her arm tightened as she guided her toward the door, insisting she'd drive Renee home for safety. I tried to follow, but Amy turned, her smile sharp as broken glass. She suggested I should head home too, that my parents would worry. The threat underneath was clear. They disappeared down the stairwell. I ran to my car, determined to follow them. I caught up at the first intersection, staying 2 cars back. Amy must have spotted me because when the light turned yellow, she gunned it through while I got stuck at the red. By the time it changed, they were gone. 20 minutes later, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number, probably Amy using Renee's phone. They were at the emergency room, for her safety of course. I drove to the hospital, finding them in the waiting area. Amy was at the intake desk, her voice carrying as she explained about finding Renee on the roof, emphasizing words like previous attempt and ongoing concerns. The staff nodded sympathetically while Renee sat silent in a plastic chair, staring at nothing. Renee's father arrived within 20 minutes, too fast. He must have already been on his way when Amy texted him. He avoided looking at his daughter while signing paperwork, his signature practiced and quick. They'd done this dance before. A psychiatric nurse appeared with a clipboard. She asked Renee about recent delusions regarding family friends, the question so specific it was clear someone had called ahead with a script. Renee's shoulders sagged further with each question. The trap was closing. I slipped out and drove back to school. If Renee had backup evidence hidden somewhere, I needed to find it before they did. I checked all her usual spots. The hollow behind the trophy case, the gap under the bleachers, inside the broken locker no one used. Every hiding place was already empty. Someone had been there first. Back at the hospital, Renee's grandmother arrived. Confusion and fear etched deep in her face. She'd received multiple calls about her granddaughter's escalating paranoia about respected community members. The old woman reached for Renee, but Amy intercepted, whispering reassurances that twisted the knife deeper. The ER doctor, young and clearly unfamiliar with the families involved, reviewed Renee's file. He recommended outpatient monitoring instead of admission. Amy's mother arrived just in time to hear this, her designer heels clicking sharp against the linoleum. Her face showed clear frustration. She'd expected Renee to already be committed. The doctor held firm though. Small mercy. Later, Renee discovered her laptop was gone from her grandmother's house. Her father had collected it for safekeeping, he said. The encrypted backup she'd made before going to the roof was now locked away in his home office, always one step ahead. Amy posted vague Instagram stories about supporting friends through crisis while never naming Renee, letting gossip fill in the narrative gaps. The posts accumulated likes and concerned comments from classmates who assumed they understood the situation. Each heart emoji and prayer hands reaction reinforced the false narrative Amy had carefully constructed. Renee discovered her phone's photo sync had been disabled during the ER visit when staff examined her device. The realization hit her while sitting in her bedroom, trying to access the cloud backup that should have contained the screenshots. Her fingers moved frantically through settings, but the evidence was gone, wiped clean during those 20 minutes of routine security checks. The school counselor scheduled mandatory sessions for Renee, but repeatedly canceled at the last minute. Each cancellation came with vague excuses about scheduling conflicts with board meetings. Renee would arrive at the office, wait in the uncomfortable chairs outside, only to be told to reschedule. The pattern became clear after the 3rd time. She was being kept in limbo about her enrollment status. Renee tried photographing old credit card statements she found in her mother's desk drawer, hoping to document the timeline of purchases at hotels and restaurants. Her hands shook so badly from the new medication adjustments that every image came out blurry. The tremors had started after the ER visit, when her prescriptions were optimized for her safety. She steadied her phone against the desk, but her whole body betrayed her, turning potential evidence into useless smears of light. She managed to record her father on her old digital voice recorder from journalism class. The conversation happened in their kitchen while he made coffee, unaware of the device hidden in her hoodie pocket. He admitted the affair existed, but insisted it was more complicated than she understood. His voice on the recording claimed her mother had known and approved before she got sick. The revelation made Renee's stomach turn, another layer of betrayal she hadn't imagined possible. 2 teachers pulled Renee aside separately after class, expressing private concern about her increasing absences. They spoke in hushed tones about not wanting to get involved in family matters. One mentioned her upcoming tenure review while looking over her shoulder. Both conversations ended the same way, with sympathetic looks and no action. I noticed Renee's social media accounts posting normally despite her situation. Cheerful updates about college preparations and graduation excitement appeared daily. The posts used her writing style but felt hollow, like someone had studied her voice and reproduced it without understanding the person behind it. Comments from concerned friends went unanswered while the facade of normalcy continued. Trish's sister approached me in the parking lot, tears in her eyes. She wanted to help, but Trish had begged her not to get involved. Their green card renewal depended on Amy's mother's sponsorship letter. The choice between helping Renee and protecting their family's future in the country wasn't really a choice at all. She pressed a crumpled note into my hand before hurrying away. The note from Trish was brief, written on the back of her college acceptance letter. Just 3 sentences expressing sorrow and explaining about the green card situation. No signature, but I recognized her handwriting from group projects. Even this small gesture of acknowledgement carried enormous risk for her family. Renee found an unexpected ally in her grandmother's neighbor, a retired teacher named Mrs. Chen, who had taught at the academy decades ago. She didn't care about social standing or community politics. When Renee appeared at her door one evening, exhausted and lost, Mrs. Chen simply opened her home without questions. She mentioned seeing this kind of thing before, though she didn't elaborate. Amy attempted to befriend Mrs. Chen the next day, arriving with fresh-baked cookies and her practiced smile. The conversation lasted less than 5 minutes. Mrs. Chen told Amy bluntly that she didn't trust children who smiled too much, then closed the door. Amy's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing frustration before she composed herself and left. My own parents sat me down for a serious conversation about my friendship with Renee. They'd received calls warning them about letting me enable her delusions. My father's business depended on contracts with companies connected to Amy's family. The message was clear without being stated directly. My continued association with Renee would have consequences beyond just social standing. Amy arrived with Renee's father for family welfare checks at the grandmother's house. They came twice a week, always unannounced. While pretending to help with household tasks, they systematically removed or photographed items. Family photos disappeared into Amy's purse. Financial documents were copied for safekeeping. The grandmother, increasingly confused, couldn't track what was being taken. Renee recognized the gaslighting but struggled to separate manipulation from reality. Her medication made her genuinely forgetful, creating doubt about her own perceptions. Some days she couldn't remember if she'd eaten breakfast or what she'd done the previous evening. The line between side effects and sabotage blurred until she couldn't trust her own mind. The grandmother mentioned something that changed everything. She clearly remembered seeing Amy's mother leaving their house during Renee's mother's final illness 2 years ago. The old woman's memory was sharp about that specific detail. Amy's mother adjusting her skirt as she hurried to her car at odd hours. The affair had been happening while Renee's mother was dying of cancer. Trish avoided Renee entirely at school, taking different routes between classes and eating lunch in the library. But she left an unsigned note in Renee's mailbox, apologizing again and explaining her family's dependence on the sponsorship. The paper was her college acceptance letter. She'd written on the back of her dream school's congratulations. The sacrifice of that symbolism wasn't lost on Renee. Renee tried documenting everything in a journal, creating a timeline of events and evidence, but pages kept disappearing. Sometimes she found them torn out cleanly. Other times, entire sections were missing. She couldn't determine if she'd removed them during medication fog or if someone else had access to her room. The uncertainty ate at her more than the missing pages themselves. A police officer arrived for a wellness check, requested by concerned family members. He found Renee agitated, but not in immediate danger. His report noted her emotional state in neutral terms, avoiding language that might trigger mandatory intervention. He seemed uncomfortable with the situation but followed protocol, leaving after confirming she posed no threat to herself or others. Mrs. Chen and I met secretly at the public library, realizing we were the only people willing to help Renee. We sat in the back corner, speaking in whispers about what we'd observed. Neither of us had resources or influence to challenge what was happening. Mrs. Chen mentioned her own battles with the town's power structures years ago. The librarian hovered nervously nearby, clearly aware of our discussion but choosing to look away. Renee spotted Amy entering a storage facility across from the grocery store. She spent 3 hours watching from her car, trying to determine which unit Amy accessed, but the facility had multiple entrances and security cameras. Amy emerged from a different exit, making it impossible to trace her movements. Whatever she was hiding remained hidden. Renee's father's work colleague mentioned casually at the grocery store that he'd been taking significant time off for family issues. The revelation surprised Renee. She hadn't known about his job instability. The colleague's discomfort suggested there was more to the story, but he excused himself quickly, mumbling about needing to get home. When Renee encountered Amy at the pharmacy, she said nothing. Amy loudly expressed concern to other customers about her dear friend's struggles. She spoke about mental health awareness and the importance of community support while Renee stood frozen in the aisle. The pharmacist wouldn't make eye contact with Renee, focusing intently on organizing already organized shelves. Renee realized her grandmother's 87th birthday was approaching when she overheard relatives discussing catering arrangements. Family members were being told it would be better if Renee didn't attend, too overwhelming for her fragile state. The party planning proceeded without her input or inclusion, another erasure from family life. Mrs. Chen shared that she'd reported concerns to Adult Protective Services about potential elder exploitation. The response was predictable. Family matters were complicated, and without concrete evidence of abuse, they couldn't intervene. The system designed to protect vulnerable adults had too many gaps, too many ways for manipulation to hide behind family privacy. Renee wondered constantly if stress and poor sleep were affecting her medication's effectiveness. Some days she felt overmedicated despite taking the same dose, her thoughts moving through thick fog. Other days, anxiety crashed through her like waves. She couldn't trust her own perceptions anymore, couldn't separate pharmaceutical effects from psychological warfare. Amy offered to help facilitate family therapy with a therapist who happened to be her mother's college roommate. The suggestion came wrapped in concern and reasonableness. The therapist specialized in family reconciliation and healing fractures caused by mental health crises. Every word of the proposal dripped with calculated manipulation. School emails about graduation requirements went exclusively to Renee's father, who didn't forward them. Renee discovered this when the deadline for senior portraits passed without her knowledge. The photographer mentioned it casually, assuming she'd chosen not to participate. Another small erasure, another way she was being written out of her own life. The extent of her father's neglect became clear when Renee learned he'd ignored multiple deadline extensions for her final transcripts. While she was dealing with the crisis he'd helped create, he'd let administrative requirements lapse. Colleges that had accepted her began rescinding offers due to missing documentation. Each email notification felt like another door slamming shut. Amy's core friend group remained loyal, but peripheral acquaintances simply drifted away. They were uncomfortable but unwilling to take sides in what they perceived as family drama. The social isolation happened gradually. Fewer responses to texts, declined invitations, conversations that ended when Renee approached. Death by 1,000 small abandonments. Renee's father initiated competency evaluation proceedings for the grandmother, citing recent hospitalization concerns. The legal documents revealed his true goal: financial control over her assets. Renee realized with growing horror that she wasn't just being discredited, she was being cut off from any potential inheritance or family support. My parents forbade contact with Renee after pressure from business associates, but we found ways to meet secretly at the public library during study hours. The librarian, Mrs. Martinez, provided quiet cover for our meetings. She would conveniently need to reorganize sections near us whenever other patrons approached, giving us warning to appear separated. These library meetings became Renee's only stable point in a world turned hostile. 2 hours twice a week where someone believed her, where she could speak freely without fear of interpretation or documentation. We sat at separate tables, passing notes like middle schoolers, finding safety in the silence between the stacks. Despite everything, Renee refused to publicly name other potential victims of Amy's mother. She suspected they existed, women who'd left town suddenly, families that had fractured without explanation, but without proof. Accusations would only fuel the narrative of her instability. Her restraint came from wisdom, not weakness. During a chance encounter at the bank, Renee asked Amy directly why she was doing this. Amy's response revealed the depth of her self-deception. She expressed genuine confusion, insisting she was only trying to help. The performance was so complete that Amy seemed to believe her own narrative of concerned friendship. The gaslighting had layers. Even the perpetrator was lost in the story. Mrs. Chen's daughter, a paralegal, reviewed documents pro bono but found little legally actionable. The manipulation was too subtle, too wrapped in family concern and medical authority. Every cruel act had plausible deniability. The system wasn't designed to address psychological warfare disguised as care. One of Amy's friends admitted privately to feeling uncomfortable with the situation, but her parents were business partners with Amy's family. Standing up for Renee meant risking her own family's financial stability. She apologized for her cowardice while explaining why she couldn't afford courage. The conversation conversation illuminated how Amy's family's influence created a web of complicity. Renee mapped the connections between Amy's family and town professionals. Doctors who belonged to the same country club, lawyers who shared investment partnerships, therapists who attended the same charity galas. Every potential advocate had conflicts of interest. The small-town reality meant no truly independent voices existed. The grandmother's birthday planning proceeded without Renee's involvement. She learned about catering arrangements from the van parked outside the house. Watching from Mrs. Chen's window, she saw relatives arriving with gifts and flowers. Her absence was explained to guests as necessary for everyone's well-being. Another lie wrapped in false concern. A family meeting Renee thought would address reconciliation became an ambush. She was presented with two options: therapeutic boarding school in Utah or agreement to move to an aunt's house 3 states away. The choice was framed as generous. They were offering help, not exile. Her father avoided eye contact while Amy's mother outlined the benefits of each option. The principal called Renee to his office privately, expressing personal sympathy while explaining his professional constraints. His hands were tied by board politics and donor pressure. He showed her transfer paperwork already prepared, suggesting it might be easier for everyone if she finished her senior year elsewhere. His regret seemed genuine, but ultimately meaningless. Amy's control showed first cracks when friends questioned why Renee couldn't attend graduation events. Her usual smooth explanations turned sharp, revealing flashes of ugly temper. She snapped at a longtime friend who suggested they were being too harsh. The mask was perfect, but not indestructible. Pressure revealed the person underneath. Mrs. Chen mentioned her own daughter's troubles with Amy's mother years ago. Nothing provable, nothing actionable, but a pattern of destroyed reputations and convenient disappearances. The retired teacher had watched this family's methods for decades. She'd learned to document everything while expecting justice from nowhere. Renee helped Trish's family find a new immigration lawyer through Mrs. Chen's connections. She asked nothing in return, just made the introduction, and stepped back. Trish cried with relief and shame when the lawyer agreed to work pro bono. The sponsorship letter's power was broken, though the family's gratitude came mixed with guilt over their previous abandonment. 3 classmates ensured Renee received graduation information despite administrative obstacles. Anonymous copies appeared in her car, slipped under windshield wipers in pre-dawn hours. Small acts of rebellion that risked social consequences but maintained human decency. Not everyone had been corrupted by the narrative. Amy's attempts to have Renee's library card revoked failed when Mrs. Martinez cited policy requiring criminal convictions for such action. The small victory felt hollow but important. Some systems still functioned properly. Some people still followed rules rather than influence. The library remained a sanctuary. Amy's father mentioned to his golf partner that his wife had been stressed about a situation involving their daughter's friend. The first crack in their united front appeared in casual conversation. The golf partner happened to be the grandmother's doctor, who filed the information away with growing concern about his patient's recent cognitive decline. Teachers who once ignored Renee began acknowledging her in hallways. Small nods, brief eye contact, minimal gestures that risked nothing but offered basic human recognition. The thaw was glacial, but perceptible. Conscience worked slowly in people who'd chosen comfort over courage. A bank teller mentioned to Mrs. Chen that she'd seen Renee's father and Amy's mother together frequently at the safety deposit boxes. They came during off-peak hours, always separately, but within minutes of each other. The teller thought nothing of it until Mrs. Chen's questions made her reconsider what she'd observed. The grandmother's birthday arrived with Renee banned from attending. She watched from Mrs. Chen's window as her family celebrated without her. The old woman looked confused throughout the party, repeatedly asking where her granddaughter was. Family members deflected her questions with practiced explanations about Renee needing rest. During the party, the grandmother became increasingly agitated about Renee's absence. Guests shifted uncomfortably as she insisted something was wrong, that Renee should be there. Family members attributed her confusion to her condition, but several guests exchanged meaningful looks. The narrative wasn't holding as firmly as Amy's family believed. Renee faced an impossible choice. Saving herself might mean abandoning her grandmother. Leaving for college or accepting exile would remove the last advocate for the elderly woman. But staying meant continued psychological torture with no guarantee of protecting anyone. The decision felt like choosing between different kinds of death. When Amy arrived at Mrs. Chen's house with a wellness check officer, Renee responded with calculated calm. She showed the officer her online college course enrollments, demonstrated her daily routine, presented evidence of stability. The officer noted no signs of distress or danger. Amy's frustration was barely concealed as another attempt at forced intervention failed. The principal's wife mentioned at her book club that the Renee situation seemed off. Her observation sparked quiet discussions among town mothers who'd noticed inconsistencies in the narrative. Whispers began in spaces Amy's family couldn't monitor. Book clubs, yoga classes, private gatherings where women compared notes on what they'd observed. Trish's family offered Renee a room if she needed to escape. Both understood the offer came with risks. Any retaliation against the sponsorship was still possible, but guilt and gratitude had shifted the calculation. They could offer shelter even if they couldn't offer public support. The gesture meant everything despite its limitations. Renee's father drunkenly admitted at a local bar that everything had spiraled out of control. Several patrons overheard his rambling about mistakes and guilt. The bartender happened to be my uncle, who shared the information later. It was the first real confirmation that Renee's father was struggling with his choices. Amy's mother escalated by suggesting therapeutic boarding school in Utah, presenting glossy brochures at another family meeting. The facility specialized in troubled teens with reality distortion issues. The program included isolation from outside influences and intensive therapy to address delusions. Every page of the brochure read like a prison disguised as treatment. My uncle's information gave Renee her first real evidence of her father's guilt. Knowing he was struggling didn't change the situation but validated her reality. He hadn't been completely corrupted, just weak, selfish, and trapped by his own choices. The distinction mattered even if the outcome remained the same. Amy's parents had a public argument at the country club about money. Members overheard sharp words about spending and inheritance security. The perfect family facade cracked in front of the town's elite. Financial stress was eroding their unity, suggesting the inheritance Amy protected might not be as secure as believed. Several community members privately approached Renee to express belief in her story. They whispered support in grocery store aisles and parking lots, but admitted they couldn't risk public stands. Business relationships, social standing, their children's futures, all depended on staying silent. Cowardice dressed as pragmatism, but at least honest about its nature. The grandmother's doctor documented concerns about her rapid cognitive decline and sudden medication changes. His notes carefully outlined symptoms symptoms inconsistent with natural progression of her mild dementia. He couldn't prove intentional harm, but created a medical record that suggested irregularities. Professional obligation met personal conscience in carefully worded observations. Armed with the doctor's documented concerns, Renee attempted to file for guardianship. The legal filing revealed her father had already submitted paperwork months ago, during her mother's final illness. The planning had been longer and more calculated than she'd imagined. Every move against her had been orchestrated while she grieved her dying mother. When checking grandmother's email for medical records, Renee's father's laptop auto-filled his password, revealing years of messages with Amy's mother. Reading the emails, Renee learned the affair was more mundane than imagined. Two selfish people using each other, no grand conspiracy. She photographed what she could before her father returned, but most emails were too vague to prove wrongdoing. The guardianship hearing proceeded with Renee allowed to attend, but not speak, watching her father gain control of grandmother's assets. Community members present at the hearing shifted uncomfortably, but no one objected to the family decision being formalized. Amy, emboldened by the legal victory, posted about family healing while hinting that Renee would be getting help soon. Renee discovered her father had paid a deposit to the Utah facility pending anticipated guardianship order, with admission scheduled after graduation. The narrator's parents, pressured by business concerns, told them to stop all contact with Renee immediately. Renee spent 3 days completely alone, no calls or texts, realizing how thoroughly she'd been isolated. She decided to stop fighting and start surviving, planning to endure until she turned 18 in 4 months. But Amy's mother accelerated the timeline, arranging for Renee to be driven to the facility voluntarily the night before graduation. The transport arrangement fell through when Renee spent the night with Mrs. Chen, who refused them entry. Police arrived to mediate, finding paperwork questionable since Renee was 17 and not under immediate threat, creating a 24-hour delay. Amy panicked about her mother's promises of connections being at risk if the situation became too public, revealing cracks in confidence. Mrs. Chen's daughter filed emergency injunction based on procedural errors in guardianship hearing. Renee chose to attend graduation, walking into the auditorium as conversations stopped and everyone stared. The principal allowed her to walk but refused to announce her name, a blank space in the ceremony where she should be. Amy's mother confronted Renee in the parking lot, but one parent live streaming graduation caught the confrontation in the background, creating evidence. Renee's father wavered when he saw his daughter in cap and gown, momentarily remembering who she was before this began. The injunction was granted for 30 days, giving Renee time but no permanent solution. Amy admitted privately that everyone has their own truth before leaving for Harvard, maintaining her self-protective narrative. Renee's father entered rehab. The grandmother's condition stabilized with proper medication, but relationships remained severed. The community slowly forgot the drama, moving on to new scandals while Renee remained marked by the experience. Renee turned 18 in Mrs. Chen's spare room, finally free but without family, money, or clean college prospects. The legal battles continued in the background, her father's guardianship claim weakened by his rehab admission, creating an opening for the grandmother's doctor to intervene. The elderly woman's medication was properly managed for the first time in months, her confusion lifting enough to ask repeatedly for her granddaughter. Mrs. Chen helped Renee file paperwork for emancipation, using the injunction as evidence of family dysfunction. The process moved slowly through bureaucratic channels while Renee worked nights at a warehouse, saving every dollar. Her college acceptances were gone, but community college remained an option. She enrolled in evening classes, sitting among other students with complicated paths. The grandmother's doctor testified at a review hearing about the medication irregularities he'd documented. Renee's father, fresh from rehab but still fragile, couldn't maintain his composure under questioning. The judge ordered an independent evaluation of the grandmother's care needs. Amy's family influence couldn't reach every evaluator, and cracks in their control widened. Trisha's family quietly paid Renee's first semester tuition, leaving the receipt in Mrs. Chen's mailbox with no note. The gesture came from guilt transformed into action. Other small kindnesses followed: anonymous grocery deliveries, a winter coat left on the porch, gas cards slipped under windshield wipers. The community's conscience worked in shadows, afraid of direct confrontation, but unable to ignore suffering completely. Amy thrived at Harvard, her social media showing perfect college life, but classmates from their academy whispered about what happened to Renee. The story followed Amy despite her efforts to leave it behind. Some believed, others dismissed it as small-town drama. The truth existed in fragments, never quite coalescing into consequences. Renee's father sent texts she didn't answer, each one a mix of self-pity and vague regret. He never directly acknowledged what he'd done, wrapping his crimes in language about mistakes and misunderstandings. The grandmother sometimes recognized Renee during supervised visits, reaching for her with hands that remembered even when her mind couldn't hold the details. Mrs. Chen's health declined that winter. Renee became her caregiver, reversing their roles. The old woman's final months were spent teaching Renee survival skills, how to stretch dollars, navigate systems, build life from nothing. When Mrs. Chen died, she left Renee her small savings and fierce example of resistance. Renee sat in community college classrooms, anonymous among other students rebuilding lives. She worked nights stocking shelves, seeing classmates buying groceries with their parents' credit cards. The therapist at the free clinic listened without judgment, helping her separate trauma from truth. Recovery meant learning to trust her own perceptions again, rebuilding from the inside out. The town moved on to new scandals, new secrets. Renee became a ghost story some people half remembered. She built her life in that shadows, one undramatic day at a time. Not vindication or justice, just survival. Sometimes that's victory enough.